Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about a review title I've helpfully received courtesy of the Indie Gamer Chicks Indie Select. Namely, this is Zeboyd's spacefaring RPG Cosmic Star Heroine. Find out if this was a title I just couldn't quit, or if I had to stop cold turkey. So, plot-wise, things start up somewhat simply, with you taking the role of the interplanetary secret agent Alyssa LaSalle, who's joined by a number of quirky teammates and colleagues, including red-headed Space Wesker. Suffice to say, I was less than surprised at some of the intrigue that proceeded to ensue. That said, despite the fact that I could guess some of the broad strokes of where things were going, I really didn't mind the narrative framework that was in Cosmic Star Heroine. Sure, it does feel a bit condensed and linear for an RPG. That said, I still found myself enjoying the characters and the story at large, and I think it's in part because the game doesn't take itself too seriously. I mean, the side quests make that abundantly clear when they include things like whooping on comical cameos from prior games, or fighting giant animated alphabet letters in a battle to the death. But even the main game has enough weirdness in its jokes that it's hard to take things too seriously. If you're familiar with JRPGs in general, a fair portion of what you do is fairly self-explanatory by this point, but Zeboyd does bring some fairly distinct tweaks to some of the formulas. I mean, sure, even if the basics of explore, loot chests, equip gear, chat with NPCs, and picking fights with every critter that looks at you the wrong way seems familiar, I think one consolation for the individuals in the audience might be the distinct lack of random encounters. You can take solace that you can actively see the monsters scooting about. I mean, potentially so you can avoid them, but like seriously, they're delicious EXP. Plus, croaking them makes the world so much easier to explore since enemies don't respawn. I mean, side note, for those who are bloodthirsty or struggling, you can refight earlier enemies for more golden experience through the magic of virtual reality, and for the sake of violence. Not that you should need to stress about that too much anyways, since the combat system is both solid and satisfying. Sure, the normal back and forth of turn-based battles is at play, as well as the tried and true staples of abusing status effects and elemental weaknesses, but there's also a trio of systems which ends up stacking to make for some absolutely absurd synergies, those being the Hyper, Style, and Desperation systems. The Hyper effect is essentially a large power-up that kicks in every few turns when your character's, super meter charges up, making their actions on that turn hit for massive damage. Though, given that your abilities also need to be occasionally recharged by defending, this actually adds some tactical depth, since you'll end up needing to set up combos several turns in advance, especially as the fight goes on and it takes longer for Hyper to kick in. Style's simpler to explain, as it basically represents the growing intensity of the fight, and just makes everything you do better the higher that score is, which is, increased by most actions. Though, this also applies to all the enemies you're fighting, which can be daunting since whilst you heal after fights, you have extremely limited means of reviving characters if they're knocked out during a fight, which can make that an intimidating prospect. Still, that leans into how desperation works, since if a character has enough style, they can just be like, nah fam, this isn't how I'm going down, when they'd normally be knocked out, and instead just get knocked into negatives. And sure, it's possible to heal them out of negatives if you can act before their turn, but if that's not an option, well, they'll get one more action before going unconscious, the likes of which will be empowered by their desperation. It's right there on the tin, folks. It honestly makes for some genuinely awesome clutch moments, though. Like, small aside here, but abusing all three of those systems in tandem was the only way that I could clear the first battle of the game on the hardest difficulty. The enemies are distinctly harder hitting, tankier, and more ruthless in that difficulty mode, which is why I went heck with that and bumped myself down to Heroine difficulty and never looked back. And for those in the audience who are just looking to explore the story and have a more casual experience, there's also 2 easier difficulty modes to further tailor the game to yourself. That said, Cosmic Star Heroine is more than just its combat, as fun as it is, and so I will refer back to what I said in the story section and iterate. This game does feel very linear for the most part. Whilst there is puzzle segments and some light exploration, a lot of what there is to do feels bite-sized. The scale of the environments and segments before you move on to the next area or find yourself engaged in another chunk of story and exposition can end up feeling a fair bit hurried at times, especially in the earlier segments of the game. And there's not much in the way of side content at first if you're looking to get a break from being effectively railroaded narratively. And even when the game does provide side areas, or the few side dungeons that exist, they also end up feeling small in the greater scale of things. Though, nitpicking aside, I will say that the overall shenanigans are still fairly entertaining, both for the silliness inherent in them, as well as the challenges they provide. The bonus dungeon and the cameo bosses are the hardest things that you'll encounter in the entire game, by far, bar none. And the rewards they give are impactful enough that they open up some legitimately silly tactics. That said, while I commented on nitpicky things, I feel I may as well give a shout out to the world map for letting you bypass areas you've cleared without having to plunge back and forth through them. Like, it's really nice to have the option to wander through an area to search for stuff I may have missed, but also bypass a handful of screens if I feel I was thorough and looted/murder hoboed everything in my path. That's some genuinely nifty quality of life there. Also, the ability to save anywhere? Just thank God. Seriously, just thank God for that. Anyway, so I'm gonna say, I dig the soundtrack to this game. Honestly, if I had to place it, there's almost something like a Saturday morning cartoon quality to it that I dug. Which, I might be onto something here. Oh, and graphically, it's really nice. Like, I definitely enjoyed the sprite work in the game and the areas. The silly enemy design was a lot of fun, and as much as I called out red-headed space Wesker the moment I saw him, well, he is introduced with one of the many spiffy pixel cutscenes that crop up. Like, there's some genuinely cinematic moments scattered throughout the game. So here we are, at the end again. And I gotta say, Cosmic Star is pretty fun. And I definitely dug the combat system. There was a lot to learn in and of itself, even before I started getting introduced to the other party members, late game gear synergies, and all that other good stuff. And honestly, despite the game having some odd bits of pacing, I enjoyed myself throughout. I definitely was fond of the ragtag group of companions I acquired over the course of the game. Especially Saibi, the Bug Bard, and Sue, who's a chill pugilist with a nice suit and dad tie combo. I deliberately went out of my way to actually try and do as much as I could, and yet despite how much I poured over the game, the pacing did always rub me the wrong way, and then it dawned on me. The ambience of the game, its music, chunks of the premise, the way things were presented narratively, even the overall length of the various small plot arcs. It was like a Saturday morning cartoon. It was a fun endeavor made of a number of bite-sized episodes, which overall build to make an arc. Which was enjoyable, but it never quite hit me with depth. It's fun, yes, but never really managed to completely satisfy my itch on a gameplay level, and especially on a narrative level. I was left with a lot of questions, and maybe that's just partly my own want to know more about the stories in the game, but all of what I said is why I'd ultimately rate the game as an enjoyable hit, but not quite enough potential to be a crit hit. Anyways, that's a wrap, so I'd like to thank you folks for tuning in and sticking till the end. Whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts or just want to share some advice or commentary at the channel at large, I'd love to hear from you folks in the comment section. And for those interested in more indie reviews, interviews with developers, or the tabletop content we've been releasing on Monday, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to get notified when we have a new release. You can also join our Discord. There's a link in the banner description if you like the sound of the things that this community stands for, being indie games, tabletop, and support for indie devs. Lastly, if you'd like to help support the channel, we do have a coffee running now to help supplement funds for our lovely editors, and to make sure we can continue to provide quality content. Again, check the description plus the banner for dem links. Anywho, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.